No, you didn't just come into the middle of a PowerPoint. This is actually where it begins. Is this sign, this is an interpretive sign, is it effective or not? What do you think? Well, I haven't given you much to go on, but I suspect a lot of you would look at it and say, it's not too long, the colors are okay, it's probably effective. Regardless of what you would say, I would say, well, how do you know? How do you know if it's effective or not? And the answer is, you can't. You can't analyze any communication strategy without knowing the designer's goal, what's the purpose of it, the target audience they have to reach to achieve that purpose, the message they're trying to send, or the physical context in which they're trying to send that message. Because all of those play a role in the effectiveness of the communication. If you can't analyze without knowing that, you certainly can't plan or design unless you know that information. Why? Well, that's one of the questions I'm hoping you'll be able to answer by the end of this class. Welcome to Library 680, Communication Theory. I'm Dr. Dave Busey, your instructor. I've taught this for 6 or 7 years, the last 3 or 4 years online, and I've taught it by presenting a communication theory and then teaching the application. And I've been disappointed in the ability of the students to apply the theory to improve their own communication. So I'm going to do this in reverse. I'm going to take a practical approach, where I'm going to present a principle or a guideline for effective communication, and then I'm going to give you the theory that supports why that's a principle or a guideline for effective communication. And the hope is that you'll be better at applying that theory to improving your own communication, because that's where the usefulness of the theory is. Before we get going, and I do this before every workshop, every class, I put up this quote: "Greatest obstacle to discovering the shape of the world, continents, and oceans was not ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge." And I do it for 2 reasons. It reminds me to tell you that most of what we know about communication has been discovered in the last 40 years, since they started doing split brain research at, I think it's UC Davis. And it's still changing. We're still learning more. So what I'm teaching is what I know today, what the field knows today. It may change, so it's not set in stone. The other is simply to ask you to clear your mind. Some of the things that we talk about may seem counterintuitive, but in fact, if I present them, it means that there's research to back them up. So keep an open mind, listen to what the theories are. Okay, about theory, a couple of very quick comments. First, theory is not fact. Please, in your essays or anything else you do, don't say, "In fact, humans do this," and when you're referring to a theory. Because theories are not fact. They're simply an explanation, and usually just a partial explanation for a phenomenon, something that happens. They're simply an attempt to answer the question, why? For our purposes, think about theory as an explanation of a relationship. So under these set of circumstances, people might communicate this way. Okay, so are these theories? None of the students read the assignment. No, that's just a description of a phenomenon. Students do not read assignments on blackboards. No, that's just a conclusion. There's no way you can predict anything. Well, I guess you can predict they're not going to read it, but it doesn't explain why. So what about this? Students learn better when cognitive load is low because of limitations imposed by cognitive architecture. Okay, what's the relationship? The relationship is between the level of cognitive load, or the amount of cognitive load, and learning. What's the explanation? Well, when cognitive load is low, it's evidently easier to learn. What can you predict? Well, what I just said. When cognitive load is low, students are going to learn better, and that's in fact its usefulness. That'll help you. This, in fact, is a hypothesis. Cognitive load theory is the theory that sits behind it, and then we're going to focus on that theory in one of the units in this class. But this gives you a general idea of what a theory is supposed to do. It's supposed to provide some kind of explanation that will be useful in explaining something. And if you can then apply it, it's useful. It helps you understand how people communicate. It helps you understand how to communicate to people. About communication. Get the definition from Weston Turner. The reading is on the website. It's not long, and it has some pretty good information in it. I'm not going to go over their definition of communication. It's a good definition. Make sure you understand what they mean by social, process, symbols, meaning, and environment. Okay, I'm going to expect you to know those. I will refer to them at times. This is where the information is. It tells you what I'm talking about. They also present 3 communication models. Just want to go over them very briefly because I want to talk about some of the nuances, some of the mistakes people make in looking at these models. The first one was the action, the linear model. And this was the Shannon Weaver. It was developed. It's like Bell Telephone. This is how much information can we transfer, how quickly. It's all about information transfer, not necessarily communication. Things you should note in this model, though, that are common to all models. There is a source or a sender. There is a receiver. There is noise, and noise refers to anything that interferes with the message. It's not just a sound. It's anything. It could be your sight if you're trying to read something, and you're blocked from reading something. That's noise. There's also a message going through a channel. These things are common of virtually all communication models. The problem with this one is as I said, it just focused on information transfer. It really wasn't about communication. Schramm, I think, and a couple of others came up with the interactional model, which shows that, again, you have a message in a channel, and you have a source, and you have a receiver, but now you have feedback going from the receiver back to the source, and you have noise. One of the things I want to point out in this model is they only show noise in the feedback part of the loop. Actually, there is noise that occurs in the message part of the loop also. I don't know why they just put it there. Field of experience is something that we'll get into more when we talk about schema theory. What it basically is we have to have some kind of shared knowledge that overlaps. And maybe it's just knowledge of language, but we have to have a shared knowledge that overlaps in order to create some meaning between us for that person to understand, for the receiver to understand what the source is trying to communicate. This was the third model, the transactional model. The problem with the other one was that it didn't show the sender and receiver. You always had to be one or the other, not both at the same time. And when you're actually presenting to somebody and you can see that person, you're watching their facial expressions, you're listening to their comments, you're in fact being a sender and a receiver at the same time. And that's what the transactional model is supposed to show. Despite the fact that they don't show a channel, there is a channel for the message. There has to be. There's still noise, there's still source, there's a receiver, and you see information going both ways, and you show a shared field of experience. The problem with this is that people look at that and say it applies to all communication. Well, it doesn't just apply to personal interactions, but basically you can only be the sender and the receiver at the same time if in fact you can see or hear or somehow interact with somebody that you're communicating with at the time you're communicating. Otherwise, you're kind of back to the interactional model where you, like this is, I guess, the interactional model where I'm communicating stuff and I won't know whether I actually communicated until I start getting some feedback on it, which will happen later, I hope. Okay, so those are models. You don't need to know the models for the class, but you need to understand these components, that all these models have a source, they have a receiver, there's a message going through a channel, and there is noise or things that interfere with that message. And there should be feedback, so you can then adjust the communication, adjust what you're trying to do, so you continue to try to communicate. So let's talk very briefly about why we do communicate. It's a really good question. Principle. Communication is purposeful. Most people agree, most experts agree, that humans communicate for a purpose. We use communication, we use information that we're trying to communicate as a tool to cause something to happen. So how can you actually design a tool without knowing how it's going to be used? Well, you can't. The point, you have to know specifically what you're trying to accomplish before you develop a communication strategy, before you decide how you're going to communicate with somebody. Knowing the purpose allows you to focus your communication effort. It allows you to create and shape your tool, the communication tool. So however you state the purpose, and this is something to keep in mind, the purpose should provide a guideline for focus. Remember that. We'll come back to it again. Categories of purposes, and this is something out of media literacy, for those of you who have taken it. They talk about the major reasons why people communicate: to inform, to persuade, to entertain. They also talk about some other purposes like to express, celebrate, challenge, and I think there's some others. Ran into another source that said that the 4 major reasons are to influence or persuade somebody to do something, or a group of people, supply or provide information, gather information, or express emotion. Okay, so I think you can put all of these under the heading of impacts. Some of them were impacts on knowledge, trying to change somebody's knowledge. Some of them are probably attitude adjustment, and some of them are behavior modification, if you're trying to persuade somebody to do something. Okay? So let me make a point. Why would I tell people about recycling? Not so they know, it's so they do. I want them to recycle. Most of our resource management agencies don't put out all these messages about conservation so people know they want you to do something. Some people believe that behavior modification is the ultimate goal of communication. Some people, so do not state this as a fact. This is something that's still in debate. Behavior modification is the ultimate goal of communication. They believe that our behavior is based on our attitudes. Our attitudes are shaped by beliefs, and our beliefs are created by our knowledge. So when we communicate, we're actually trying to change the knowledge base, but we're hoping for a ripple effect right up through behavior. That's what they believe. So, is behavior the ultimate goal of trying to influence or persuade somebody? Quite likely, you could make that case. Supply or provide information, trying to inform somebody? Well, you can certainly think of a lot of cases where it is. I'm trying to inform you of the rules and regulations. I'm trying to inform you of directions. There's a lot of cases, I think, where you could say that supplying or providing information is aimed at behavior. I'm trying to gather information. So I'm using communication to gather information. Well, there's a behavior I want. I want the person I'm talking to give me the information that I want. Express emotion. Celebrate. Well, there's still some debate whether this is actually communication, because communication is, according to Weston Turner, social. So it involves people. Are you celebrating or showing people that you're celebrating for a purpose? Interesting question. Can't quite answer it right now. To entertain, yeah, certainly you can think about behaviors. I want people to laugh, or I want them to feel good. Challenge. If I'm going to challenge somebody, what do I want? Well, I really want is for them to back down and for me to then gain ascendancy or supremacy over that particular situation. So you could make the case in every one of these situations that behavior is the ultimate goal. So is impact on behavior the ultimate goal of communication? Well, that's the focus of your forum discussion. There's a forum discussion this week. If you don't understand how the forums are going to work, then certainly email me, but it should be self-evident. You're all assigned a forum, so just check that out, and I will actually post who's in what forum on the introductory page, so you know. Some comment. I made these comments on forums also, but I want to run over them. Please read the instructions. Okay? Your first post is by Thursday at 5 p.m. 2 posts before Sunday. It can't be a discussion if you post everything on Sunday when the discussion's about to end. 3 posts total. That's a minimum. You can comment more. It's a discussion. Add meaningful information. That doesn't mean just, you can't just say, oh, good point. I like that. Add some meaningful information, but keep it short. It's a discussion. My role in those forums, and I will come on periodically, is to get you to think in certain ways. So don't read into my comments that they reflect my opinions or my stance. My job is to facilitate your education, and that's what I'll try to do on the forums. Any questions? Well, hearing none, I will sign off. Good luck.